Well, the first question then is, what is sin? And it's a very important question, because sin is a word that many people in society are familiar with, but they don't define it properly. They don't understand it biblically. If you were to turn to 1 John chapter 3 and verse 4, you have the closest thing to a definition of sin that you find in the Bible. Sin is transgression of the law. In Greek, sin is lawlessness, antipathy to the law. It's a life lived against law, in violation of the law of God. So sin, in that it is lawlessness, is any breaking of God's righteous commandments. Now you'll note that it's not a breach of your law. It's not a contradiction of your ideas. And I think that's really the way the majority of people in the world define sin. They set themselves up as God. They believe in sin, but sin is what they believe it to be. They have their moral code, and if you breach that, then you're guilty of sin. And, of course, much of that is contrary to the Scripture. So the cardinal sins today of society are actually virtues, as commanded by God. So if you're against homosexuality, well, that's a sin today. You're so wicked, you're so immoral. That's not God's view. Sin is not transgression of our law, not contradiction of our ideas. It is any violation of the law of God. Any flagrant and defiant breaches of God's law, where God sets up a clear parameter like a roadblock, and you, in your rebellion against God, don't give any thought for it, and you just plow through, sinning with a high hand, rejecting the boundaries of God's commandments. But then it's also falling short of the standard of which God sets. So it's not just overreaching and breaking through the express things that God forbids us in Scripture. It's actually falling short of anything that God commands us. That's how Paul states it in chapter 3, verse 23. For all have sinned, listen, and come short of the glory of God. So now we're thinking of our attempts to obey God. And Paul says it doesn't matter how hard you try, the end of it will be you can't reach the standard. You're like the javelin thrower, and he's got a certain distance to reach, and it doesn't matter how many years he tries for, how many times he throws that javelin, he cannot get to the standard. He always falls short. Therefore, all are guilty. And all are guilty in their actions, in their words, in their thoughts, and in their disposition, in their desires. The desire for sin is sin. You need to hear that too. You hear nonsense today. Well, I have a homosexual desire, but I don't sin unless I act upon it. No. The disposition, the corrupt desire is sin. Do you think God looks upon that corrupt desire and says, look at that, that's pleasing to me, just as long as he doesn't act on it? No, it is perversion. It is abominable.